Today, we're opening up a really remarkable document. It's a year-end analysis that kind of forces us to look inward.
Usually inward.
Literally, we are deep diving into the 2025 findings from the Human and AI Institute, or HAIL. And the opening premise of their report is it's genuinely disruptive.
It is.
Their conclusion was that the greatest threat to U.S. national stability in 2025, it wasn't an economic recession, it wasn't some geopolitical conflict, it wasn't even a cyber attack.
It was what they call the human interior.
Exactly, the state of the human interior.
And that's such an unnerving diagnosis, right? Especially coming from an organization that's, dedicated to mapping the future of technology.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
What makes this so powerful is that the AI experts themselves concluded that the biggest risk factor for the whole system wasn't the machine, it was the human operator basically breaking down.
So our mission today is to analyze exactly how HAIL got to this conclusion about the 2025 mental health and addiction crisis.
And more importantly, how it shifted from being a personal issue, your problem, to a deep-rooted national structural problem.
Okay, so let's start with that central finding, because it really does recalibrate how you look at national threats.
It really does.
HAIL states that for the first time in modern history, the U.S. ranked mental health and addiction among its top 3 national challenges.
Top 3, right up there with the cost of living and the strain on the general healthcare system. I mean, these are perennial issues.
And suddenly mental health is on that same level.
Right. And this is more than just a bad year in the statistics. The report really emphasizes this was a foundational shift in priorities. It means the country was forced to acknowledge that its collective emotional health.
What they call the emotional infrastructure.
Exactly, the emotional infrastructure. It had become essential for the nation to even function. But it was also fragile and failing.
Like a crumbling bridge.
That's the perfect analogy. We were treating the nation's collective nervous system like a crumbling bridge that suddenly threatens the entire economy. You can't ignore it anymore.
And that analogy is so important because a bridge doesn't crumble overnight. It tells us this wasn't a sudden crisis.
No, it was an accumulation.
Which brings us to the first part of their analysis, the quiet accumulation. They break down how we got here through 3 distinct historical eras.
You really have to trace the history to understand the scale of the failure. So let's look back at 1980. HAIL calls this the era of external crises.
Right.
When you asked Americans what worried them back then, they pointed outward. It was inflation, the energy crisis, rising crime, urban decay. The threat felt like it was coming from, outside.
And crucially, mental health issues at that time. They were nowhere near the top 10 concerns.
Not even on the radar.
They were stigmatized, kept private, and totally unmeasured in the public sphere.
Yeah.
If you had a problem, it was your problem, period.
Exactly. It existed entirely in the shadows. Then we move forward to the year 2000, which they call the era of structural shifts.
Okay.
This is when the fundamental rules of life really began changing. You have globalization, the internet, healthcare costs are skyrocketing.
And mental health finally enters the national conversation, but as the report says, only as a secondary issue.
It's a secondary issue.
Meaning it was viewed as something that affected individuals who were, struggling to adapt to this new, faster world. We started talking about stress, but it was still framed as a personal burden.
Right. If you just worked harder or got a better therapist or learned to cope.
You could manage it. It was a symptom, not the disease threatening the system itself.
Exactly. And then you jump to 2025. This is where the report says the crisis shifted completely. From personal struggle to
societal collapse. I call it the era of internal crises. And the evidence they cite for this is, it's staggering.
The signs were just everywhere. I mean, overdose deaths reached these historic, heartbreaking highs. Youth mental health emergencies were surging. It put pediatricians and schools in this constant state of triage.
And loneliness was formally recognized as a public health concern.
Yeah.
Which is just a profound statement on its own.
It's a profound failure of social connection. We are now measuring isolation, which used to be absorbed by neighbors and family, but now it's treated like a specific illness.
And you see the impact on national function, too. It's not just about clinical care. It's about capacity.
Absolutely. Burnout was actively destabilizing essential professions. You're talking nurses, teachers, even tech workers. Workforce participation dropped because people just lacked the emotional capacity to show up every day.
And underneath all of this, you have families just trying to manage this overwhelming, invisible emotional load.
So HAIL's conclusion isn't just that we have a mental health problem, it's that we have a failing mental health infrastructure. The system has no capacity left to self-correct.
So if that's the result, what 2025 really exposed, according to Hale, was a profound and frankly uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
That the pace of modern American life had completely outgrown the capacity of the American nervous system.
That is the core defining truth of the report. We spent decades building faster technology, faster communication, faster economic cycles,
Fast expectation.
faster everything. But we did not build faster emotional adaptation. Think of it like this. The world is operating at 5G speed, but the human brain is still operating at, a biological 2G speed.
And that widening gap, the world we built and the humans we still are, that's the source of the chronic strain. So the issue isn't speed itself.
No.
It's the lack of an emotional shock absorber.
Exactly. That structural mismatch shows up everywhere. No sector was untouched. It was visible in schools where teachers spent more time managing anxiety than teaching geometry. It was in workplaces, eroding productivity.
Hospitals were overwhelmed. Families were strained to the breaking point.
And of course, in the digital sphere, where we were constantly subject to algorithmic comparison and this relentless flow of information, the constant ambient emotional load just became unsustainable.
This is where the report pivots from diagnosis to the actual mechanism. Hale doesn't just describe the pressure cooker. He identifies three interlocking forces that strained the entire social system.
And these three forces hit every sector. They didn't just affect the vulnerable, they affected everyone.
So let's start with number one, economic precarity. We've always had financial stress. So what made it so different in 2025? Why couldn't we cope anymore?
Because the stress became chronic and systemic. It wasn't episodic anymore. Hale points to housing instability, wage stagnation that just disconnected effort from reward, rising costs that made basic planning impossible.
So it's constant.
It's constant. And the report argues that because it's so pervasive, no amount of individual resilience, no amount of yoga or positive thinking could offset it. You can't meditate your way out of a 20% rent increase.
That's a crucial distinction. It frames economic hardship not just as a financial issue, but as a biological weapon aimed right at the nervous system.
Precisely. When people can't plan 6 months ahead, the nation loses its capacity for long-term thinking, for innovation, for trust. The system itself injected this deep uncertainty into daily life for, 60 to 70% of the population.
The second force they identify is digital acceleration. This is social media, algorithmic comparison, 247 connectivity.
All of it. And this fundamentally changed identity, belonging, and attention faster than our culture could ever adapt.
We basically gave ourselves a tool, the smartphone, that rewrote the social rulebook before we even understood the game.
That's a great way to put it. We're constantly exposed to these perfected, curated lives through algorithms designed to maximize engagement, which, let's be honest, often means maximizing anxiety and comparison.
Our attention spans are fragmented.
Which makes deep focus, the very thing you need for complex problem solving, increasingly difficult. And the report notes this isn't just about screen time.
Right.
It's the fact that this constant connection eliminates the crucial human need for downtime, for solitude, for psychological decompression. We never clock out anymore.
And the third force, which feels like the direct consequence of the first two, is the collapse of community infrastructure.
You could argue that the U.S. fundamentally traded its sense of belonging for greater personal freedom and hyper-autonomy.
We gained independence.
Radical independence, the freedom to move anywhere, work from home, define ourselves completely. But in doing so, we essentially shredded the local, reliable social safety net, the village that traditionally absorbed daily stresses and provided meaning.
So if your house is too expensive, that's precarity. You spend all your time comparing yourself to others online, that's acceleration. And you have no local support system to buffer the shock.
That's community collapse. And that cocktail is what Hale says created the 2025 crisis. Those three forces metastasized. Which brings us to the turning point. Why was 2025 the year this became so visible at the national level?
It was the point where the crisis began crippling fundamental national functions.
Exactly. The problem moved beyond the clinic and started hitting the economy. Employers couldn't hire or retain staff because of absenteeism, burnout, emotional incapacity.
Schools were in triage mode.
All the time, managing conflicts and mental health emergencies instead of focusing on core education. And the healthcare system couldn't keep up, which created this vicious feedback loop that further strained the staff.
And crucially, families were saturated. The private unit, the family, it could no longer absorb the emotional and financial load.
And communities just couldn't compensate for that collapse of connection. So the definition changed. Mental health was no longer just a medical issue, it became a national capacity issue.
A failing emotional infrastructure is a direct threat to productivity, stability, innovation.
The country's entire future.
And this breakdown forced the U.S. to ask a really critical question. What does it mean to build a strong society when the human interior is the most fragile part of the system?
It forces a total reevaluation of what strength even means. It's not just military budgets or GDP, it's the underlying emotional durability of your people.
That's the challenge. But the Hale report didn't just stop at diagnosis. It proposed a path forward, systemic rebalancing.
Right. Identifying 5 essential pillars that have to be rebuilt. And they stress these are not optional policy luxuries.
These are the new foundations of national resilience.
That's the key. Recognizing these pillars are essential infrastructure, just like highways or power grids. If you want a resilient society, you need to fund and design for these things.
Let's dedicate some time to these pillars, starting with number 1, community infrastructure.
This is all about intentionally restoring the physical and social spaces, the rituals, the consistent relationships that restore our need for belonging. This means policy supporting third places, libraries, community centers, parks. It's about designing cities that promote bumping into your neighbor, not isolating you in a car.
It's interesting that the solution to a high-speed digital problem is often low-tech, hyper-local connection.
It absolutely is. The report emphasizes that meaningful connection is like the ultimate anti-fragility measure.
Pillar 2 is economic stability. If precarity is the chronic stressor, stability has to be the antidote.
Yes. This focuses on creating predictability in housing, in work, in daily life. Hale suggests major shifts here, like linking minimum wages to local cost of living and, critically, stabilizing the rental market.
So people can just breathe.
So people can breathe and focus on higher level issues than basic survival. It acknowledges that when the baseline is constantly in flux, no amount of individual coping will ever be enough.
So solving the emotional crisis requires solving the housing crisis first.
In many ways, yes. They are inseparable.
Moving on to pillar 3, digital boundaries. This addresses that acceleration problem.
And this isn't about, shunning technology. It's about cultivating a healthier, more conscious relationship with it. One that prioritizes human attention and mental space over algorithmic optimization.
It's about fighting for sovereignty over our own attention.
Exactly. It might involve policy around feed design to reduce antagonism, or just cultural norms around device use in schools or at the dinner table. It's establishing the rule book we forgot to write in 2005.
The 4th pillar is emotional literacy. If the challenge is the complexity of our inner lives, what does literacy actually look like in practice?
This is about equipping people with the actual skills, the tools for navigating stress and conflict. Think of it less like deep psychoanalysis and more like learning the foundational grammar of your own nervous system.
And how to communicate it clearly.
Yes. So introducing emotional intelligence training early in schools, continuing it in workplaces, it moves beyond just knowing you feel anger. It's about having a protocol for processing and expressing that anger constructively.
So you're not just managing emotions, you're utilizing them.
Precisely. It's an essential communication skill, not just a health pursuit.
And finally, the 5th pillar, meaning and purpose. This feels the most abstract, but maybe the most crucial.
I think so. Hale argues that the rapid changes of the 21st century have fragmented our collective narrative. We need to reestablish a shared understanding, a sense of collective contribution that helps people locate themselves in a changing world.
A sense of contribution that goes beyond just being a productive consumer.
Correct. When everything is purely transactional, the human interior quickly loses its bearing. Rebuilding meaning is about establishing a cultural compass that points toward collaboration and, enduring value.
So these 5 pillars, community infrastructure, economic stability, digital boundaries, emotional literacy, and meaning and purpose. Hale presents them as the roadmap for the next decade. If anyone fails, the whole system remains fragile.
That's right.
So what does this all mean for you? The core insight here is that 2025 will be remembered not as the year a crisis began, but as the year the United States finally recognized that the health of a nation starts with the health of its people.
Not just their physical bodies.
Not just their bodies, but their minds, their relationships, their sense of meaning, and their capacity to belong. The failure was structural, and so the solution must be structural too.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. To truly understand the future of America, we have to first understand the state of the American interior. When you look at those 5 essential pillars, community infrastructure, economic stability, digital boundaries, emotional literacy, and meaning and purpose. Which of them do you believe will be the most difficult and complex to successfully implement and sustain across the entire nation? Think about the bureaucratic resistance, the cultural shifts, and just the sheer effort required to rebuild that foundation.